Hello, everybody. Michael Rubenfeld here. Hi, how are you? Wow, it's been a while since I've made a video. This is a video for YouTube, but I'm probably going to cross post it onto Facebook, where I have been continuing to post reels and stuff about my experience in Calgary. Um, But I think I'm going to post it, cross post it, just because I think that maybe what I'm talking about might be interesting to some of the folks that follow me on Facebook or that are Facebook friends with me. I know a lot of them, and a lot of them are people who work in the theater in Canada or in Poland now. And basically, yeah, I've been in Poland. Sorry, wow, I've been in Canada now for about 5 weeks, performing a production of the Lehman trilogy, which is a show that was a big success in London. It's still playing in London, or it's been brought back for a run in London. It was that popular, and it played on Broadway, and it won Tony Awards. And I know it's being done a lot in the English language world, or in America and Canada. I don't know if there's been any Australian productions yet. This video is the differences between the Polish and Canadian systems. I've talked a lot about systems, but I think that what I want to talk about is about how money and audience work, because the theatrical system, or the theatrical culture of Canada, anyways, is very dependent the on the way that money and audience operates. And the same thing is in Poland, of course, would be the same thing everywhere, right? Like, money is, at the end of the day, money dictates a lot of things. And since living in Poland, I've had a lot of questions about the system here in Canada. The theaters here are not funded by the government at the same level that theaters in Poland are. So, the theater that I'm in can only survive thanks to donors. It gets public funding. I don't know what level, but it's probably, you know, 30, 30% of its budget probably comes from government. 30% probably comes from donors, and then 40% probably comes from box office. So selling tickets, and a lot of them, is really, really important. I'm just making this up, but I used to produce a lot of theater here, and I sort of, have a rough sense of what those numbers are. But what that means is, because the theaters are so reliant on both donors and audiences, and only 30% is, say, coming from government, that means the theaters are required to basically please 60% of that other 60%, 70%, right? That the donors and the audiences. So what does that mean? That means that if an audience doesn't like a show, they're not going to buy a ticket for it. And of course, that means the same thing all over the place. But it makes it very, very difficult for theaters to take risks, because if a risk fails, it can have a huge consequence on the budget of that theater. So, for example, a theater like the theater that I'm working in, their season consists of several very famous, well-known plays, either well-known plays or musicals. And this is not a criticism. It's an observation that, you know, the this it's a this theater say it started with a show called The Play That Goes Wrong, which was a kind of goofball farce comedy that played on Broadway. Really goofy show, pure lowbrow humor. And then our show, which is a risk. It's although our show is a Tony Award winning show, it's still risky because it's, three actors talking. It's entertaining, but it's about the Lehman Brothers, it's about commerce, but it's still a risk. And, people are coming to the show for sure, but they're not going to sell, we're not going to sell this out. So this would be probably a risky show, but just enough risk that they can take. But in order to offset that risk, the play that goes wrong, the fact that the plays that goes wrong was so successful meant that the theater made a lot of money. And the show right after ours is A Christmas Carol, which they do every year. And then they're going to do A Streetcar Named Desire, which is one of the most famous plays in the world. Then they'll do Blithe Spirit, also an incredibly famous play. And then they'll do Legally Blonde, the musical. And in there's also a show in a smaller theater by an indigenous writer. I don't remember the name. And that will be the riskiest show of all. Now, this is a season that personally I see as the season that this theater felt it needs to program in order to ensure that its audiences and its donors are satisfied. Because, audiences who like the shows that they're seeing, they ultimately become donors. But what's happened is this: what really has happened in large theaters like this, and in a lot of the kind of North American theatrical ecology, is that the theater is built on pleasing its audiences, and the theaters that do the best job pleasing its audiences are the ones that end up, having the most success in surviving. Now, in Poland, the theaters are funded at a much higher level at a much higher level. Not all of them. Some of them are not. But people don't, there's no real fundraising for theaters in Poland unless it's a private theater. And private theaters are usually only run by movie stars in Poland. And those movie stars have connections to people with money, and then they can open a theater, and the theater can revolve around the fact that it's run by a movie star. That doesn't exist in Canada because we don't have movie stars. We have Paul Gross, but come on. Nothing against Paul Gross. He's just not, not at he's not at the same kind of level as an American movie star. Whereas in Poland, Polish movie stars are huge to Polish people. Anyways, that's for another time. But anyways, there are certainly commercial theaters, and in those commercial theaters, there are shows that are built to please, musicals and this kind of stuff. But in the state-run theaters, and when I say the state-run theaters, I mean theaters that are funded by the government or by the city. They're funded at high levels, and basically they are expected to take theatrical risk or to take cultural risks. That's a vast generalization. However, the kind of theater that gets made in these theaters, you would never do A Christmas Carol in one of these theaters. You would never do. You wouldn't. People wouldn't come, because that's not what these theaters are for. Now, of course, there are some theaters that are sort of smaller, nichier theaters in Canada, like the Tarragon Theatre, for example, that does new work. But its largest theater is a 200-seat theater, and it's still a very small theater in the grand scheme of things. Whereas in Poland, you'll have 500-600-seat theaters that are programming some pretty out there stuff. And some of it's bad, some of it's, there's bad and good theater everywhere. But man, the level of ambition that's taken in Poland, and also the fact is that the majority of the work that's happening is new work. It's brand new work. And if someone is doing an old play, it's got to have, it'll have some sort of like theatrical twist. It'll have some kind of convention attached to it. But there's just a lot of risks that can be taken at these theaters as a result of the level of funding that's happening. And directors, they're not, their role is not to please their audiences. Of course, like anything, audiences are audiences, and if an audience is pleased and a show will sell well. But a challenging show can also sell well in Poland. And people will come, and people will look forward to being challenged. And if a challenging show is a good show, people will go. They will go to a good show. And now the other thing, systemically, that is, the real game changer is the repertory system. So when a show opens in Poland, it runs for 5 days, and then it continues to run for years. And it allows itself to become known. A culture can become built around a show. It can get word of mouth, can start to take hold. And shows will run 6 years. And that's kind of common for shows to run 5 or 6 years. Of course, not 5 or 6 years straight, but, they'll still be running. They'll still be running for several years, and people will go and see the show because they'll have heard about it. In Canada, a show like the show I'm in right now, it's running for 3 weeks. So we busted our bums to get the show up, and it's almost entirely reliant on marketing, right? It's almost reliant on marketing. There's been like no reviews here. It's weird. There's like no reviews. I know it's like the same in Edmonton. People just like, papers stop printing, don't do reviews anymore. And so the way that people come to the way that people hear about shows are either marketing. They have to have heard about the show through marketing or through word of mouth. When a show's running for 3 weeks, you don't have a lot of time for word of mouth. So you have to spend a lot of money in marketing to get people to hear about the show in order to sell the number of tickets that you've got to sell. Their aim is like minimum 400 tickets a night. And, I think this theater I'm in can sell 700 a night. So this is why A Christmas Carol, Legally Blonde the musical, Streetcar Named Desire. This is why these are the shows that get programmed, because they also are famous shows. There's just so little opportunity to develop, to really develop a meaningful Canadian theatrical culture as a result of the system that exists here versus the system that exists in Poland. And, there is a meaningful theatrical culture in Poland. I would say that there is not a meaningful theatrical culture in Canada. And, of course, there are going to be people in Canada who will want to disagree with me. But, the greatest theater artists that we have in Canada are not really working anymore in the theater. And I guess I'm talking mostly about the writers, our great writers who, wanted to write in the theater because they really wanted to be a part of that, a part of the theater. They realized that the culture of meaningful theater making is just so difficult here. That they've left to write for television, or they've left the country. Um, or or they've hit their 60s, 70s, 80s, and people just think, oh, they're too old, or they're too white, or to be produced anymore. There's a lot of energy being put towards supporting emerging voices, emerging artists in Canada, and there's sort of like money that goes towards it. But in Poland, older artists still work, and they're like famous. It's just so different. It makes me very sad. I'm really happy being back here, but I really could, I really wish there was a way to focus on meaningfully building Canadian culture, finding ways to do that. Um, but with unless the system changes, it's just not possible. In my opinion. I'm curious to hear what you think. This is a very long video, so thanks for watching.